Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us online for today's Democracy Forum at Toronto Metropolitan University. My name is Ashna Ali, and I lead Youth Leadership Development Programming at the Dais, TMU's public policy and leadership think tank focused on building shared prosperity and a more equitable Canada. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining from Toronto, on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples covered by Treaty 13. As the daughter of refugees from Kurdistan, I often think about what land means and how deeply identity, belonging, safety are tied to a place. And my family's story is shaped by displacement, a loss of home, and the search for safety and dignity. This is a powerful reminder that the ground we stand on carries history, responsibility, and relationship, and that conversations about democracy must begin with respect for Indigenous peoples and the ongoing work of reconciliation. That same sense of responsibility carries into how we think about education today. At the Dais, our work sits at the intersection of education and technology. Through our Heads Up initiative, we explore how young people are navigating attention and learning in a digitally saturated world. We design practical tools to help students, parents, educators, and policymakers go phone-free at school. And we work directly with young people, students across Canada, to support them in leading conversations and change within their own communities. Students consistently tell us that they want balance, trust, and policies that reflect how they learn. And so today's discussion is an important opportunity to bring their voices into the room. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Martin Regg, a political columnist at the Toronto Star. Martin is the founder of the Democracy Forum at TMU and a senior fellow at the Dais on campus. He is also a senior fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at U of T. He was a foreign correspondent for 11 years in Asia and the Middle East and was also a parliamentary correspondent in Ottawa. Martin, over to you.
Thank you. Bienvenue. Bonjour. Welcome to our 48th Democracy Forum at Toronto Metropolitan University, where we try to do democracy a little differently. And if you're joining us on thestar.com, thanks for watching. Education is core to our democracy, and democracy is core to our educational system. Today, we're talking about the politics of education and the change of course in the classrooms of Ontario under the Progressive Conservative government. So let me tell you about today's guest. Paul Calandra is the Minister of Education since it's been about a year now since he took over. He previously served as Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and before that, Minister of Long-Term Care, and before that, he was the House Leader, government House Leader in the legislature, keeping the trains running on time. He first won election as the MPP for Markham-Stouffville in 2018 for the Progressive Conservatives. And in a previous life, he was at the federal level, he was parliamentary secretary to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. He had been elected as the MP for Oak Ridges Markham in 2008. He holds a BA in political science and history from Carleton University. Minister, welcome to Toronto Met.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
It's hard to interview an experienced politician who also studied politics without being at a disadvantage, competitive disadvantage. So to level the playing field, today I am joined by a friend and colleague, Kristin Rushowy, who is no stranger to TMU. Chris is a senior writer at the Toronto Star specializing in education and politics on the social issues team. She has covered Ontario politics from the Star's Queen's Park Bureau and wrote in depth about the creation of full-day kindergarten. She's also covered the university beat and served as an editor at the Toronto Star, and perhaps most important, she's a graduate of this university. Welcome, Chris, to the Democracy Forum at TMU.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, I like to remind people every time this is not a press conference or a confrontation. It's a democracy forum where we try to dig a little deeper, which means we also try to get more in-depth answers from our guests, not just the usual talking points. So if you registered to watch this chat on Zoom and you're watching this live, you can submit questions to our guests using the chat function. So start thinking now about what you'd like to ask. But first, Chris and I will kick it off. Minister, this is a democracy forum, so let's begin with democracy when it's working and when it's not working. Our audience won't be surprised to hear that we're going to start with trustees, who are, as you know, the oldest form of elected representative in Ontario. Not many people know that trustees came into being at the beginning of the 1800s, long before Ontario and Canada had come into existence in the way they are now, before there were MPPs, before there were city councillors, and so on. You wanted to get rid of them. Tell us why, and then tell us why you changed your mind and came up with this kind of compromise solution. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks. First, I wanted to, I certainly did not believe that trustees were the best way to run a system. I thought over the years, much of the power of trustees had been removed from them, starting really back in the Harris time when taxation was removed from them. But as we digested this over the last year, I thought it would be a little bit unfair then to have three of the four systems with trustees representing them and not have the last one, the English public, with elected trustees. And as I had said from the beginning, I really didn't want to get into constitutional battles or charter challenges throughout this reform. I thought that would just be a distraction. Look, I do agree that trustees is a long-standing form of government, as you have said. But I just don't think with the changes that have happened over the years that they remained the way they were functioning was the best way to continue moving forward. So we had a choice to make. Either we were going to restore their ability to tax, we were going to restore their ability to make serious decisions, or we were going to go in the direction where the Ministry of Education steps back up to the plate, shows some leadership, and that's the direction I decided to take.
But in a way, you're kind of half pregnant here, which is hard for a minister of the crown, in the sense that you've kind of emasculated them, reduced their honorariums, their salaries. Yeah. You've scaled back some of their powers even more than the old Harris Tories did in the 1990s, and you seem to have been boxed in by this fear of constitutional challenges and so on. But other provinces have tried it. Yeah. Are you going to wait and see, and then if Quebec and others can continue with a different model, is there some unfinished business here? Should we stay tuned to see what you're going to do next on trustees?
No, I really don't want. I have looked into Quebec situation. You say they're in the midst of a court challenge right now. Some challenges in Nova Scotia. A couple things I didn't want to do. I didn't, obviously, the court, and I didn't want to get into that. But I also didn't want to eliminate school boards, because I still think school boards themselves are very important, because they do reflect some challenges and differences in each part of the province. So I wanted to maintain that. I heard from a lot of trustees, look, don't take away our ability to represent parents. That's the function that they think that they do best. So we leave that responsibility with our trustees on the English side. As you know, the French side maintains all of their existing authorities. The Catholic system will still retain their denominational rights. But that's the model that I thought going forward will help serve us best. And again, this is about the ministry stepping back up, right? We continuously download, and you've heard me say this a million times, you're probably bored of hearing me say it. We continuously downloaded from the Ministry of Education to school boards and trustees who had no power or authority to do the job that we wanted them to do. And then we expected different results. And by and large, I think it's because governments have always been afraid to take on education, always been afraid to assume responsibility. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that this has hit the right balance.
Okay, well, Chris is going to ask you in a minute about school boards. She has a couple of questions, but let me just finish on trustees if I can. Yeah. As you know, long before the Tories took power, when the Liberals were in power, I too had some concerns about trustees. Mm-hmm. I thought it was a dysfunctional form of government. I've taken a lot of heat for that, as I'm sure you have. But it seems to me that where you also stop may not have been just the court challenges and the fear of a legal gridlock, but also some second thoughts from your fellow MPPs in caucus and perhaps the premier that trustees are a convenient buffer. People can, they kind of offer a line of defense between you or MPPs and parents who are angry about some of the problems or have just ordinary concerns about school boards. So wasn't this a little bit of a safety hatch for you that you could keep them in place to protect you? Because if you get rid of them, well, then you own every problem in the school boards.
Look, I'm not afraid to own the problems that are happening in the school boards. I will say that, and the ministry taking responsibility. But there is no doubt my colleagues on all sides of the House reflected on that with me. Like, who will parents turn to? We've seen great success in the supervised boards with respect to the student family offices that we've opened up. We're going to be opening up across all boards, but there is no doubt that across party lines, that was one of the things that I kept hearing over and over and over again. We have to have somebody to turn to locally. And no doubt, look, Martin, it wasn't my first choice, but ultimately that is where we landed. And I'm going to move heaven and earth to make sure that the system that we've put forward is the one that is going to work. But I won't shy away. Like, I'm not going to shy away. No, people say, oh, that's the era of change is done. No, if boards don't meet the expectations that we've set, I will not hesitate to use the authorities in Bill 33 that allow me to assume responsibility for boards to put them back on track, regardless of whether they have trustees or not. We're going to assume more leadership from the Minister of Education.
Chris.
But I did read, I knew when we didn't do this, Martin, I said, oh my gosh, Martin's going to be the most angry of anybody because you've been very consistent on this for a long period of time. So
there you go. Over to you, Chris.
The Premier.
Yeah, just talking a little bit more about local governance. I mean, you have taken over, the province has taken over a record 8 school boards.
Mm-hmm.
You've been a bit vague on when they can be returned to power, when the local trustees can be returned to power. And I'm just wondering, can you tell us what you're looking for? What do boards have to do in order to be returned that power? Are you looking for them to eliminate their deficits? What are the goals here?
Yeah, both obviously get back to a surplus budget, but also then restore their financial stability. And each of the boards have different challenges, frankly, on restoring themselves, bringing themselves back to long-term financial stability. Also, we're looking at all of these boards. There's some boards that have made some really challenging and difficult decisions that make no sense. So if you look at the Dufferin-Peel Catholic situation, board that has really a dramatic challenge with respect to long-term disability, and that board is close to bankruptcy, despite the fact that they've done a lot of good things there, right? So each board is different, but ultimately stability, long-term stability in their budgeting and their financing, restoring their surpluses to a healthy margin, and making sure that they can function on a long-term basis on at least a balanced budget approach.
And how do you think the supervisors
go ahead.
Go ahead, Chris. How do you think the supervisors are doing so far? I mean, we've seen a few controversial decisions in a couple of the boards. I think we've seen the Ottawa Carleton board looking to hire an assistant to the supervisor, which has caused a bit of controversy as well. So, overall, what's your take on how this is working?
Look, I'm very excited so far. We've heard a lot of the noise that surrounded a lot of the trustees and some of the more challenging boards has come down. Ottawa, when I first was put into office, Ottawa, literally the calls and complaints coming to my office from Ottawa were almost collapsing our internal phone system. People were just in a fit of rage, and we've seen that start to come down. People are very, I'm not suggesting that 100% of things are going perfectly, but the tension has been reduced. They are starting to make decisions that have put the board back on the right track. And you see it locally. If I just focus on Ottawa, 1,000 kids that used to be in the public system have now transferred over to the Catholic system during that time period where trustees were in office. So that has started to calm down. So by and large, I think some good things. We're noticing a lot of different things within each of the systems, like Thames Valley. Just an absolute mess when it came to human resources and how it treated its teachers because of lack of leadership there. You had York Region where the trustees were just battling each other. They spending millions fighting each other if they didn't like a decision that each of them made. And then the challenges in Near North go without saying. I mean, just over and over. But that's not to suggest, Chris, that there aren't school boards and trustees that aren't doing really good things and that we're pleased with the work that they have done. But I think we just have to be more aggressive, and we have. When we know something is happening, we got to step in and put them back on the right track. And you're not wrong. Look, almost 40% of students are under the control of the Ministry of Education and supervisor. It's a lot, but I'm very pleased with the direction so far.
Yeah, I mean, you've taken over 8 school boards, and you're still in charge of them. And sending in a supervisor, the two big ones in Toronto. I'm going to play the role of curmudgeon just to take the heat off of you. Sure. It's okay. I've got a thick skin. I get all the letters and the hate mail from folks who think I'm too single-minded on this. I wanted to echo your point that there are a lot of good trustees. Kathleen Wynne was a great trustee before she became premier. My own trustee in Toronto was a terrific trustee, but I think they were the exceptions that proved the rule. Equally with school boards, they have been problematic. Did you consider, forgive me for asking, or how seriously did you consider getting rid of school boards entirely and just owning it?
Not at all. I didn't. That was one of the things right from the beginning. I was never going to get rid of school boards because I do think they perform an important local function. I get the criticism all the time. Oh, he's running the education system from his big massive office in Queen's Park. Well, obviously not. We're not going to do that. But again, I think it comes down to a lack of leadership from the Ministry of Education in a lot of instances. We allow boards to do things, and the Near North is a classic example. And that's not to suggest I have wonderful people who work at the ministry. That guidance always has to come from elected officials, and sometimes that has not come from us. When you look at some of the challenges that we've had, it's because of a lack of oversight in a lot of instances from the Ministry of Education. So we can't remove ourselves from the responsibility that has come about because we've had to take over these 8 boards. The Near North is an example. Dufferin Peel is an example. The different things that are happening in the Toronto District and Toronto Catholic school boards that were negotiated locally by trustees that we should have maybe had a bit of oversight over. So I think it's both, but and that's why I keep talking about centralizing and a more consistent level of education across the province. And that has to come from leadership from the province. And that is where I think we've failed over the last 50 years. Every government, every stripe, every administration. And I think by and large, because we're afraid to take on the system, we're afraid to own or take responsibility for it. I think parents and teachers have kind of had enough. And we've had to step up in the way that we have.
Okay, well, then we'll have to hold you to account for that as well. Chris,
100%. 100%.
Yes, well, I wanted to chat too about the changes that you're making to the administration and the leadership at school boards with having a CEO and a CEDO. I mean, it's going to be a fairly complicated system, and I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about how it's going to work and also what's going to happen to existing directors. They all have contracts, and I'm assuming they're not all going to be paid severance. So how is that going to work? Are you just going to wait out their contracts and then implement this board by board?
Yeah, look.
And just for fun for our audience, just CEO. We know what a CEO is. CEDO, Chief Education Officer. I find it hard to keep track. Over to you.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be easy, but I can appreciate that. Look, the CEO is going to be somebody who runs the day-to-day business and management, human resources, the capital projects, and the budgeting of the board. That is going to be their job, and the Chief Education Officer is strictly focused on educational, academic achievement. And that's it. Some of the existing directors, frankly, will have the qualifications that they need to become a CEO, and in that instance, they could fulfill both duties. Some will not, and some might choose to be. I'm hearing from some who would rather be the Chief Education Officer than the CEO, which is perfectly fine. I don't want to fire anybody, frankly. I don't think we need to. Some contracts will come to an end, and they don't want to be part of it, but. I've been excited so far by the directors that have actually reached out to me and said, we're ready to be a part of this. And it's a clear line of communication, right? The Chief Executive Officer, do the budgeting, make sure our schools are built on time, make sure they're renovated properly, do the human resources that is required, and Chief Education Officer, make sure you're receiving the highest level of academic achievement possible. And then with these student family resource offices across the provinces, parents will know who to turn to, so that we can kind of take that pressure away from teachers as well at the same time.
One of the issues, though, and we'll hear this, I think, in some of the questions, a reminder to the audience to submit your questions via chat if you'd like to ask the minister. But some of the concerns is that, well, look, you're saying that these boards are guilty of financial mismanagement. But as Chris has written in a lot of her coverage in the Toronto Star, part of the problem is that you came in and declared a moratorium on school closures. A little bit of in my view, a sop to your rural base of people. No one likes school closings. No one likes change, as you know. And so how do you account for your hard line on closing schools while asking the boards to magically balance their budgets when there are new needs and new pressures, new schools that have to be built.
Yeah, no, 100%. Look, we continued the moratorium that had been put in place very late, but by the previous administration. But we have maintained that, and I don't foresee us lifting that moratorium in some of the rural parts of the province, because already the distance that they have to travel is a bit more than I'd like. But we have said in the supervised boards, take a look at it, get back to us, and let us know what would make sense. The other thing is, we've been very clear to this under the supervised boards. You have to tell us if our funding formula is working. Tell us what's working, what's not working. Does it need to be modified? And we are getting all of that advice. So this really isn't just about boards that have made bad decisions. Look, I can give you a litany of bad board decisions, but ultimately, as I always say, like, I don't think people care really. I think they just they understand that, look, you spend $43 billion in total in my ministry between daycare and education. Surely to God, you can get a better result. And that's what this is about. I'm not going to shrink away from the responsibility that we have. Yes, we absolutely have a responsibility to ensure that the dollars are being spent appropriately. But if we don't put the controls in place and deliver an opportunity, then how can we just lay the blame at them?
So I am hearing a bit of a concession that, for the boards that we put under supervision, I guess we have to recognize that we have to look at closures in a way that we refused before. So it is a bit of a balancing act. Chris, you wanted to ask about absenteeism, I think, which is, there's a lot of complexity in education, but the absenteeism question is fascinating, but also very complex. And Chris has written about that. Go ahead, Chris.
Yes, I mean, we just had numbers come recently that, only 40% of kids are meeting attendance standards, which is attending 90% of the time, and that's in high school. And I think for grade 12 students, it's even lower. You've talked about, attendance counting for 10 to 15% of a high schooler's mark. And I'm just wondering, other jurisdictions, everyone's grappling with this, but other jurisdictions have started public education campaigns, awards for schools or classes that do really well. Sometimes it's as simple as providing transit passes. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about other measures that you will also consider to boost attendance.
Yeah, I'm not going to. We're talking a lot about this with the educators, frankly. The idea of adding attendance and participation exclusively came from educators. They said at another outside the house one day, this was not on my radar at all. I was very frustrated at what the attendance numbers were. I kept getting them in, and it was frankly shocking to me. But teacher after teacher, especially in high school, said you got to bring back participation in attendance, and you got to let us make some judgments on this. If you trust us, then trust us to judge this. So, but that's not it. That's not the end of it, right? So we'll determine where in the 10 to 15%, what will be attendance, what will be participation. But I think there are other things that we're also looking at. We've heard from other areas that when they put in inducements or benefits for meeting attendance, that they've seen positive outcomes from that as well. But I still think participating and being there is very important, and it has to be part of a mark. We reduced it at the grade 11 and 12. I wanted to be 15% there as well, but hearing from the universities, they said that'd be a little bit too subjective. So that's why we came in at a different rate for 9s and 10s than we did for 10 and 11. But I think there is a bit more work to be done on that as well over the summer, frankly.
I remember you got a bit of pushback from journalists on that issue, and they said, well, if workers can work from home, why can't students? And you said, well, they're adults and students are not adults. So these are all interesting talking points. They're great talkers, and everyone has a point of view on this. Can I just shift to another element of democracy, which is collective bargaining and the union movement? Yeah. Full disclosure, Chris and I are proud members, union members of Unifor at Toronto Star. And look, contract negotiations are coming, and that's a tough time for any minister, no matter which political party, whether you're Democrat, Liberal, or Progressive Conservative. You take a lot of heat when negotiations take place. I remember the day you were sworn in, I bumped into you, and I was teasing you about this issue of unions, and Tories sometimes have a love-hate relationship. Oh my goodness, I'm getting a cell phone.
We're all getting
cell phone warning.
Yes,
yeah, there we are. It's not just me. My phone was muted for the record, so please don't expel me from the class here. I was teasing you about Tories and talking to unions, because in the past, the Tories tended to call union leaders union bosses and kind of would spit it out. And I would always say, well, union leaders are elected leaders just like you, and politicians just like you. Your predecessor, Stephen Lecce, also was the target of a lot of criticism, hostility, and yet he had interesting, not widely known publicly, but he had interesting back channels with union leaders. They were quite productive. How is it working out for you? Did you take my advice, my free advice? And are you? I don't want to get union leaders in trouble for talking to you if they shouldn't be, but are they whispering in your ear and back and forth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And to be clear, they are fierce when they need to be in protecting or advancing issues for the people that they represent. But they've also been very generous with their time with me and providing advice on things and helping me avoid some challenges at the same time. But yeah, no, make no mistake. I mean, and I know you're not. This is going to be some challenging negotiating ahead, because they have some things that they want addressed. But they have been very good to me. I will say this, despite the public appearance, and we disagree on a lot of things, for sure. But I found them very generous of their time. If I've asked, they've been there for me. And if we have to have an off-the-record conversation because I really need some advice on something, all of them have been generous of their time. And at this point, I think they would hopefully agree that we have a fairly good relationship as we start to what will be a difficult few months of negotiations.
Okay, now you're getting them all in trouble.
Honestly, I took the advice, and I appreciated the free advice.
Chris has more detailed questions on negotiations.
Yeah. So, there was that breakfast meeting at Queen's Park where I think some of your comments about bad apples upset, the union leaders who were there. You attended a committee meeting and were questioning some of the union members, which I think they felt was a bit aggressive. There's been some social media posts. I mean, is this sort of pre-negotiation saber rattling? I mean, it does seem a bit confrontational. How does it serve you with negotiations coming up?
Look, I'm not going to shy away from doing what I have to do, my duties. When it came to the committee, look, I think everybody knows I love every part of Parliament. I love every part of it. I love debating in the House. I love question period. Absolutely love committee. I wanted to be there to aggressively support and defend my bill, and that's what I did at committee. That meeting when they were at the legislature, I spoke my mind, and that's it. And I stand by the comments, right? I do. We just came off a moment where we had to fire some teachers for some really, really bad language. They all supported that, and it was a reflection. Look, we have some challenges. All of us have challenges, but let's meet the day. And I asked them at that meeting. I think maybe you might have been there. I'm not sure, but work with me. Just work with me. There's going to be a lot of things that we have to do over the next little bit. Work with me, and we'll move forward. But look, if that questioning at committee or if that speech causes them stress, then my word. As I said in the House, that they will never survive around an Italian dinner table on a Sunday, because that was hardly aggressive. That is just how I speak, and that is how I go about my business, and I love it. And most of them, look, the public face and the back channeling, I think, are two different things. They have a job to do, and I appreciate that. And but we'll get it done. I mean, we all want the same thing, frankly. I don't think any of us want a big, long, prolonged strike. We want to keep our teachers in the classroom in September. So I'm excited by the opportunity to get that done. And by and large, we have labor peace when it comes to education in the province over the last number of years. So
let me circle back to labor peace, and then I'll come back to Chris with more questions about bargaining. But I'm just going to, because I'm a columnist, I'm allowed to have opinions, and so I'm just going to. And this is a democracy forum where it's not a confrontation. We're trying to get you to lower your guard and speak a little more candidly, and equally as moderator. I was fascinated by the blowback that you got for folks who weren't watching this, and not everybody follows committee hearings in legislatures or parliaments. But the minister gave his testimony about the bill as the witness, and then when he was done testifying, he then changed chairs and went to sit as a committee member, because he is an MPP, as we said in the introduction, and turned the tables, so to speak, and as an MPP asked questions of the next guest, who was a union leader. A lot of folks' noses were out of joint about this. I confess, and since you were having some fun with good-natured stereotypes and archetypes, Chris and I are both have East European family backgrounds, and so we also had political, interesting discussions at the dinner table. So I thought it was all fair fair fun and games, but a lot of folks thought, well, that was just over the top. Were you surprised by the look? I felt like it backfired. It felt like there was too much blowback, and that whatever points you were trying to make, that maybe it was too clever by half. But were you surprised by that kind of that people thought it was so awful that you would actually then turn the tables and ask questions?
I think the people who didn't like the answers that were given by the people who I had questioned might have been a bit put off by that. But I was actually quite happy. I mean, when you look at the answers that we're getting, it seemed that by and large, those who I questioned were in support of the initiatives that we're doing. So I was happy. But if I have another bill, I'm going to do the same thing. It's just, Martin, I just love Parliament. If anybody hasn't figured that one out yet, I absolutely love every single part of that process, and I'll do that again the next time, and hopefully people be prepared. You know, if you're there too much, people say, oh, you know, he's too involved. If you're not there enough, they say, oh, he's not taking his responsibility seriously enough. But I'll do it again because I love debate, and I love hearing from them. And I'll say this, Rene Jansen, who's the elected president, he was a teacher of mine. So that was the first time in 35 years that I ever asked him a question. So, I don't think he took offense to the questioning. I think everybody did the job that they had to do, got their points out, and I'll do it again. I just loved every part of it, Martin.
Okay, again, I want to just take a minute here because again, it's a democracy forum, and I do think people sometimes get we Canadians get our noses out of joint if somebody doesn't, if there's a tall poppy or somebody goes out on a limb. So now I'm going to have some fun with you if you don't mind. And I have watched you in the House. You're House leader. You know all the tricks. You know all the rules. Which is why you were able to do that switcheroo. And also, I've learned as a journalist, I don't pretend to be a know-it-all. I just try to know all the questions. And that's why we have Chris here as a co-host. So because you had an unfair advantage as minister because you know every little bit of that legislation, and not everyone else is as well briefed. But I've seen that trick before. Quick question, going back in time. When you were parliamentary secretary to Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and you know where I'm going, which is part of the introduction of your biography. You've kind of opened the door, so I know I'm gonna go there. Yeah. You took some flack for being a bit of a smart aleck, or more important, as I recall, I didn't watch it, I just read about it. You were a bit too much deflection and dodging and ducking, and people got tired of it. So this is not to revisit that as much as to ask you, what did you learn from that? And you had to do an apology, as I recall. So how have you grown as a parliamentarian?
Well, I learned so much from that experience, to be honest with you. That was one of the toughest 2 years ever. There's a couple of things I took away from that. Firstly, Mulcair, probably one of the most effective opposition leaders since Ed Broadbent, for sure. Extraordinary what he did in that time frame. But for me personally, like I remember when I took on that job, I was given advice from the RCMP. Don't say anything in the House that will compromise our investigation. Don't do anything in the House that will compromise their ability to defend themselves. And if you don't know an answer, don't pretend that you do. And that was 2 years worth of very difficult questioning and answering. But I learned a lot at that. I really, really did on that. And you really learn a lot when you then lose. If I say it's not even what I learned in Parliament, I learned how to be a parliamentarian, I think, in Ottawa. But when you lose, you reflect on that and say, okay, if I ever got a second chance, I'm not going to waste that opportunity. I'm going to move forward all the time to try and get things accomplished. And that's what I learned more. Losing really helps you, really crystallizes what you want to accomplish if you're ever lucky enough to get the opportunity to do it again. But look, Prime Minister Harper was great to me, but sitting across from Mulcair and getting beat up by him every day. If you want to know what I learned being a parliamentarian a lot from Tom Mulcair. He was just extraordinary. I know that might sound weird, but being pummeled by him every day was an incredible experience. It really helps set you up for jobs like this.
Very interesting. And as a reference, of course, to Tom Mulcair, leader of the NDP and leader of the opposition at the time. And another reference for our listeners is that you lost in 2015, I think it was, right? You lost the election. So you were out of Parliament, and I'd like to talk about that at the very end of the show. Chris, did you want to follow up at all about bargaining, or should we move to civics?
I actually wanted to ask about education funding, if you don't
Mhm.
mind.
Sure.
I know the government says it's spending more than ever, which is true. School boards will say it's not kept up with inflation most years. And I think one particular area of concern is special education.
Mhm.
This is also going to tie into
Yeah.
negotiations because I know that teachers have talked about this as well and the need for more support. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, is this an area that the government needs to address maybe sooner than negotiations, given bargaining doesn't start until June and then may continue throughout the next school year?
Yeah.
Is this something that you need to address more urgently?
It is, look, it's something I'm looking at 100%. I've spent a lot of time in the classrooms over the last year. Obviously, you've seen where I'm going, and teachers are very, very frustrated. They're frustrated that they feel that they're not getting the support that they might need in order to help every child. I always bring it back to the day it really crystallized for me was when I was in Peel Region, and I had a teacher, and it was a class of about, I think it was 27 students, and she had 7 IEPs that she was dealing with, and a very high needs student as well. And she got very emotional because she thought, I'm not helping everybody in my class. And when you leave this classroom, the people who are out there are going to tell you that we're doing amazing, but I need help. You got to do something. So we are looking at this. One of the things the Premier said is you got to work with the other ministries to work with health, work with children and community, Minister Parsons' ministry. If there's overlap, try and bring that together. But special education, I'm sure it's going to be part of bargaining, but it is something that we are reviewing right now. How do we deliver it better? How is it going to be also more consistent? And it is a big, big part of the next year of the things that the ministry is going to be looking at to improve upon. There's no doubt it has to be.
Is there a way for the government to look at the complex needs, the complexity of class makeup for teachers? Because that is the one thing that they do talk about. And I do believe
Yeah.
in Alberta, they're starting to address it anyway.
Yeah, I'm hearing that a lot. It really depends. So a lot of the teachers who have the independent educational plans will say, look, it, I might have 3 or I might have 7, but sometimes the 7 work together well, and that makes sense for me. But sometimes the 3 is a bit overwhelming. You have to look at that makeup a bit more closely than you do. One size does not fit all. I'm hearing that over and over and over again. And then again, on the more complex issues, the complex needs cases, what are we doing? Are we ensuring that we're giving the appropriate level of resourcing? So it is, I don't want to say it's the only focus, but it will be a main focus of the ministry's efforts over the next year, is how do we ensure that we're improving upon on the outcomes. And it's not for a lack of desire from teachers. The other thing I hear from a lot of teachers is too, is sometimes parents don't appreciate that it's not just a class of 25, 26, whatever it is. It's a class of maybe 20, and then a number of different plans that they're having to do. And a lot of parents sometimes don't appreciate that. And sometimes we, government in our funding formula, might not necessarily allow that to be addressed properly in the classroom. So 100% we're going to look at that going forward. It's a huge part of the system, bigger than it's ever been before, to be honest with you. And we got to do something about it.
Minister, this is our 48th Democracy Forum, as I said off the top. But at our very first Democracy Forum, we had the leaders of all 4 political parties talking about democratic engagement. Together on stage, yes, it was just before the 2018 election, so you were not yet paying attention to provincial politics. Your head was still in Ottawa. But yeah, we had all the 4 leaders together, not to have a political debate, but to talk about democratic engagement. And a former lieutenant governor, 2 of them were also at our Democracy Forum subsequently, and also their priority was democratic engagement, what you would call civics, what Chris writes about, which is civics. You live and breathe politics. How do you make civics better in the school system? We all see the students, and when we're in the legislature, we see students traipsing through and getting the tour, and they come to the legislature gallery and they watch the grown-ups acting like kids. That's life, that's debate. But how do you improve civic engagement beyond high school, and how do you make that better? How do you make politics better?
Yeah, that's such a really good question, because I was seized with it from a very, very young age, and I always found it very interesting. So for me, it's always weird that people don't find it as interesting as I do. But I also reflect that in my family, I'm probably the only one that finds it interesting as well, right? But I think it's we have to celebrate our institutions more than we do, and I think Canadian modesty is a challenge. We have incredible institutions, and we have to celebrate those more often. I think we have to better reflect on the courses, on the civics courses that we are offering, and how often we are doing this. When I get in the classroom and separate grade 5 students into a parliament and then let them go at it, they get energized. But I also look at what Speaker Skelly is doing. Like, she's touring the province. She's bringing the mace out there with the sergeant at arms and bringing Parliament to people and really engaging them. So I think we have to stop behaving like Parliament and politics is just for us. And we have to say, oh, let's not just in grade 5 and grade 10, let's educate them. But I think at every step we have to do something. We have to engage. And then our history curriculum, we have to do a better job in our history curriculum. So I'll just say this, I'll get in trouble for saying it, but if anybody ever had a question about whether our constitutional monarchy is the best form of government ever created, all they need to do is look down south and tell me if we don't have a better system than they have down there. And we should celebrate that and help people better understand it. And I think we have not done the best job of that, not only in Ontario, but across the country, frankly. It's a vacuous answer, but I get so passionate about this one. I don't know what the exact answer is, but I know when you engage kids in it, then they get more excited about it, and then they don't hear about it again until grade 10, right? So I think we got to do that.
You can have the passion, but have the power. So you need to empower teachers and the curriculum to make it stick. So
100%.
We'll be watching on that one. Okay, let's open it up. Before we go to audience questions, I do want to share some time with our friends at the Dais who support the Democracy Forum. And Ashna Ali, who opened this event for us, has this question for you, Minister, that she's asked me to pass on. Ontario updated its school phone policy a few years ago, and there's been public discussion, of course, about moving toward a stricter approach. Evidence and research from the Dais supports this. If that direction is pursued, why do you think it's important, and how do you plan to move forward on this? You can tell us today.
Yeah, look, every teacher, again, and almost every classroom that I've gone to, teachers have asked me to take a look at it. We do have a policy, grade 7 and 8s, or like JK to 6 are not allowed to have phones, and then it's supposed to be kind of hidden unless a teacher asks you. So what from 7 to 12? So we are looking at evidence of this, and should we then eliminate access to phones entirely throughout the system? Now, when I said something about this last week, I said, oh, well, my kid needs to bring a phone to school. Well, obviously, we're going to still allow whatever we do. Children will be allowed to have a phone, bring it to school, have it in their backpacks. If a teacher wants to use it for a course, sure, because a lot of teachers integrate it properly. But the rest of the time, should there be access to a phone, whether it's on lunch, whether it's on recess, whatever. We are looking at next month, we're going to be in Quebec, and I'm going to be touring some of the schools and speaking with some of the principals and the Minister of Education there, where they have instituted a ban like we're considering. I'm also working with a number of European jurisdictions that have done this. Australia has gone a bit further. I want to see the evidence. There's some contradictory evidence coming out of the United States over the last little bit that says it doesn't make any difference at all. So I want to make sure that we get the proper evidence. But for me, and anecdotally, it seems to be a good position to be going to. And I've not come across one teacher who says that this is the best thing. What they say to me is that the ban you got in place, I need to feel supported, that you're going to have my back if I enforce that ban that is already in existence. And I think they make a very good point on that. But a little bit more work to be done on this one, because we have to get it right. Because when I first announced it, I said, well, oh my gosh, they're not going to be allowed to bring it on the train and go to school. No, obviously, we're going to allow that to happen. But, as a father, man, it stresses me out. I have to tell you, the proliferation and the amount of time that they spend, it worries me. But I know I can't make that just based on me being a father. I have to make it based on as a Minister of Education.
Yeah, it's definitely a talker in Quebec and Manitoba and everywhere. And I know the Dais is doing a lot of work on this, and we've hosted at the Democracy Forum on this as well. Okay, here's a question that Ashna has passed on from some high school students that she works with in her leadership work. Here's the first question. Do you think digital literacy should be a core part of what we learn in school? Like how to manage attention, how to build healthy tech habits, understand media, and set boundaries online?
Yeah, it's hard to argue that it shouldn't be, to be honest with you. It's a lot of people say, well, everything changed during the pandemic, after the pandemic, but we started to see evidence even before the pandemic that there was a lot of challenges, and something that the ministers of education across the country are grappling with the exact same issue when it comes to digital literacy and helping our kids better understand the threats but also the opportunity that exists with it, right? So I actually do think there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and a lot of this is us catching up to where people are going. So, short answer, yes, I actually think it's a very important part of it. We've done some things in the province of Ontario, but I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done, frankly.
Okay, here's a question that does not come as a surprise to me. Again, from a high school student, a lot of students feel stressed, overwhelmed, or disconnected at school, even when they're doing well on paper. What do you think schools are missing when it comes to student well-being and belonging?
Oh, gosh, I wish I had an answer to that one. I think from what I'm hearing, again, from educators, is the school cohesion that used to be there, because the attendance is so low in our classes, and because the nature of how kids are being educated has changed so much, they're not developing that sense of I want to say community the way they used to, right? If you go into a high school around lunch, there's literally nobody there. They've all left the school to go buy lunch at McDonald's, or we made changes that don't allow you to have anything of any interest in a school cafeteria. So during lunch, nobody's there. The classes, the attendance is so low, so they're not developing those friendships. So I think that is part of it. It's not the only thing. There are obviously mental health issues that come with the challenges of social media and phones. So I think we have to look at that. But I think first and foremost, we have to get our kids back into the schools. We have to develop that sense of a better sense of community that used to be there, and I think that'll start us on the right path. But it's not the only answer, for sure. I know that sounds like a small thing to say, but I think first and foremost that's important.
Okay, here's a question from Kristin. Violence in schools and classroom disruptions remain at the top concern for many parents and staff. Yeah. What specific solutions are being implemented to mitigate these issues without compromising the education of other students? Will teachers be able to appropriately discipline children who misbehave?
Yeah, I've talked about this a lot. We have to return to a responsibility. There has to be responsibility for actions. One thing that we can't do is expect our teachers are not police officers, so we can't expect them we're expecting them to be police officers, counselors. We've put so much on them. We have to take that away. And I keep hearing from teachers, I don't know that you'll have my back. I don't know that the board will have my back. I don't know the ministry will have my back. So there has to be consequences in the system for bad behavior. I've heard this over and over and over and over for educators. The same with the attendance, right? Like here, kid pops in and out of the class every once in a while, disrupts my class. And that is allowed because 100% of their mark is based on coursework and not attendance and participation. So I think that's part of it. But we also have to look at progressive discipline. I hear this a lot from educators. Is that the right way? There seem to be no consequences for bad behavior anymore. And we're looking at that as well. If I heard it from one teacher, I've heard it from every single one, the frustration. And a lot of them will say, I can't say this because if I say it, people are going to say that I'm just some hardcore old school curmudgeon. But ultimately it comes down to, I'm not sure you have my back. And that's why we have a hard time making difficult decisions. And I think that if the ministry does anything over the next little bit, it's showing them we have your back. And if there are difficult decisions that have to be made, then we'll support you in making those decisions.
Yeah, that's an interesting recurring theme.
Is also going to be positive, frankly.
It's a recurring theme also on cell phones. I think you mentioned that. That's something I know from reading Kristin Rushowy's articles that teachers will always say, this cell phone ban is great, but I'm on the front lines here. Are you going to have my back? Here's a question on funding. When boards are forced to eliminate deficits, that often means cuts in classrooms. How does that align with your goal of improving student outcomes? If school boards cannot run deficits and rely almost entirely on provincial funding, how is it reasonable to hold them accountable for financial shortfalls without adjusting the funding model?
It's not. I wish it was just as simple as, the government provides more funding and everything would be fine. But in the supervised boards and the boards that are under supervision now, it's not just a matter of the government isn't funding enough. There are decisions that have been made that are causing challenges within each of these systems. The Dufferin Peel Board is at bankruptcy because of a decision that they made with respect to long-term disability payments. I recently made a change to international languages in the Toronto Catholic District School Board, which was costing millions of dollars for that system. Challenges a system that had something unique that no other board had, right? So, look, we are going to look at the funding for it and make sure that it works. But it's not just about the funding formula. It's not just about the amount of money that the government is giving. It is really about a lot of decisions that have been made by trustees. There are pet projects. I'll say it. I have in Peel Region, we have a trustee who has had a portable at his disposal for over 10 years. He's using it as a storage locker. Portable that's not needed, could have been used somewhere else. But for 10 years, the board decided, okay, you use it as a storage locker. The amount of money that York Region is spending, the York Region Catholic is spending fighting themselves in court, probably balances their budget. Near North is a surplus board, but kids are learning in a half-demolished school right now because trustees couldn't get their act together. So are there challenges that every board will face, unique challenges that the funding formula might not necessarily address in a unique set of time period? Probably. That's why we're looking at it, especially when attendance goes down from one year to the next. I think that can be a challenge to boards. But if more money is needed, then we'll put more money in the system. I've said that constantly. We will do that. But let's get our boards first under control. A lot of these boards have surpluses too, right? A lot of these boards also have surpluses that we do not allow them to touch. Maybe we have to take a look at that as well, and how they can utilize different parts of the funding formula.
You've brought back in trustees. I want to just quickly circle back to where we began without dwelling on trustees too much. But you spent a lot of time, took a lot of airtime in the months before your legislation dropped, talking about expense account abuses by trustees. And there's been a lot of it in the newspapers, some egregious abuses of people going on long trips to buy art in Italy. This fantastical stuff. Again, not all trustees are doing this, let's be clear, but there were abuses. Is your legislation, trick question, and Chris can help me on this, but is your legislation going to stop these kinds of abuses by trustees?
100% it will.
How?
Absolutely. Right.
I mean, how do you stop them from these guys? These were things they weren't supposed to do even under the old rules.
Their expenses will be limited to in some of those boards where they have a distance to get to a board meeting. We'll allow them travel back and forth to the board, and they will have very, very limited expense accounts. One of the challenges that we have under the current system is that the people who are approving their expenses are also owe their life and their existence to trustees. Right. So the director of education hired by the trustee is also the person who has to approve a trustee's expenses. And if you look at the York Catholic system, 9 different directors of education in 7 years, which this was part of the problem. By separating this function into CEO, into a director of education, we deal with that, but we have vastly reduced trustees' expenses through Bill 101, and also have removed the ability for boards to finance trustees' memberships in outside associations.
Okay, but back to democracy here. By now, creating this kind of half-pregnancy situation, aren't you afraid, or perhaps you're hoping, that there will be far fewer trustees running? You've cut their honorariums, you've cut their powers, you've cut their expenses, and some of them are already saying they're not going to run. So,
gentlemen's bet, Martin, that we have more people running for trustee this election than we did. Look, the last election, it was very low, the amount of people who actually stepped up. There were acclamations, a massive amount of acclamations across the trustee system. I'm willing to bet that there'll be even more this time around than we had last time. So, gentlemen's bet on that one. How about that? People are already stepping up. Even in supervised boards, people are stepping up to run, right? So I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about it.
I'm not a gambling man, and I know enough not to take a sucker bet. So, quick question. Back to this is a question from Jillian, and then I'm going to circle back to Chris for the final question. What is the most effective way for parents to share their experiences with the education system so that those concerns are systematically captured and reflected in policy decisions? And how will the ministry enhance community use of schools, after-school evenings, weekends, and summers? You've built in sort of patient navigators now, or that's in our hospitals, but navigators to help people kind of supplement what trustees do. So how do you answer Jillian's question?
First and foremost, always go to the teacher first if you have something to address immediate for your child. But the overall experience, I can't stress this enough, as these student and family and parent resource offices open up and all of the boards, please contact them. We're finally getting data back from all of these calls. So in the supervised boards that have them, we know what the concerns are. We are able to break it down and see, is there something happening in a school or in an area that we need to address? So the data that we're finally getting from these offices has been remarkable. Obviously, we get a lot of calls into the ministry, but I can't stress this enough. Once these offices are open, please contact them. Let them know what the issue is, because we do download that. The ministry is downloading that information. It's the first time we've had a pipeline into what parents are actually feeling and their frustrations in every single board. And the information back has been awesome. As far as access to schools, this drives me to a level of distraction and anger. Across the province of Ontario, board has a different way of doing this. But a lot of boards will not give their communities access, even when a town or a city will step up and say, we will cover all the costs. We will manage it for you. A board won't allow them to do it. We can't be building community centers all over the place when we have a gym that is available to communities. So I do want a province-wide approach to this, frankly.
Okay, quick last question to Chris, and then I do have a quick follow-up. But Chris, you wanted to ask about, since this is a democracy forum, politics and politicians in the schools.
I did. So, I mean, you've talked a lot about wanting to keep politics out of schools and in particular graduations. I'm hearing that that's including, not allowing MPPs or trustees or any politicians to speak at graduations. I'm just wondering if this is a bit of an overreach. I mean, typically they're just bringing good wishes from the board or from the government. What are you trying to accomplish here?
Yeah, I have no desire to have MPPs not at graduation ceremonies or going to the grade 5 or grade 10. I think no matter what party you're from, you should be allowed in and you should be able to do that. I always question whether a parent wants to hear a speech from an MPP or an MP at a graduation ceremony. Everyone I've attended to is so overwhelmingly hot. The moment I see them get up there, even myself, it's like, oh my gosh, please get out of here. It's more about the kid. But no, this does not include politicians as such. Like, they're elected officials. The board should allow them in on the civics classes, and if they want to bring well wishes during graduation, absolutely. I also heard, oh my gosh, he's not going to allow valedictorians to speak their mind. It's got nothing to do with that, right? Speak your mind, do what you got to do, but let's keep the divisive things on a day-to-day basis. The things that divide communities, keep that out of a school. And I have every confidence that a federal member of parliament, a councillor, an MPP, they go into a school, they're going to appreciate that and understand why they're there. So it's not a directive from me to keep politicians out. And some boards may feel that that's the best way of doing it. Not going to interfere with them on that. Look, I've never been invited to a graduation ceremony in York Region. In the entire time, whether as a federal member, I was elected in 2008, and now it's 2026. I've never once been invited to a graduation ceremony. This far predates anything that I have brought forward. It's just been the policy in York Region not to invite their members to these graduations, and I've always respected that. Now, my daughter,
for what it's worth,
I had no choice. So.
For what it's worth, at my daughter's graduation, her school was in Kathleen Wynne's district, so the premier, the ex-premier, came and she behaved. Did not badmouth the incumbent government.
Yeah.
I do have one last quick question that we ask all of our guests, and that is, tell us a little bit about, you've given us a hint already about your own passion for politics, but you were a political staffer, as I recall, before running for office. What advice do you have for students and also for teachers who can be quite politically active and get a leave of absence and so on? Their unions and the government are very supportive of that. A lot of teachers have been in politics. What advice do you have, what encouragement do you have for people about putting yourself forward and running for elected office, having yourself had the highs and lows. You're a minister of the crown. You also been rejected by voters and then brought back. It came back. It made a comeback. Tell us about that.
Yeah, look, it is an awesome responsibility. One of the things I always tell a lot of the new members is there's going to come a day when you're not allowed to walk through the doors of the legislature or the House of Commons. You won't have that awesome honor to do that anymore. And that day is a very difficult day. So appreciate every opportunity that you get. I started off by delivering flyers and handing out flyers because I was angry with the decision that a government had made many years ago. In Canada, you have an incredible opportunity to participate, unlike any other place in the world. No matter what you believe, you have incredible access to elected officials. You have incredible opportunity to learn from them, and anybody can get elected. My parents came here in the 50s and in the 60s, and then their kid a number of years later was parliamentary secretary to the prime minister and now minister of education. There is no other place in the world where you could actually accomplish. It's not just a talking point. You can do it. It is tough, though. Like, make no mistake about it. It is a very tough thing, but it is so incredibly worthwhile. It's hard to explain. I live right next to the Rouge Park. I'll just give you this little final story. I live right next to the Rouge Park in my community, and that's something I fought very hard to bring about when I was in federal office. And I drive by that every day. Nobody will know the role that I had to bring the Rouge Park, but I do, and it gives me great comfort when I do that. But we'll also see somebody in the community who's like, man, you helped me do this. We were in a lot of trouble. It is just a great opportunity. Another thing I'll say is the last thing I promise. If you get this awesome responsibility, don't waste a second of it. Don't waste a second of it, because you will always regret wasting any time when you get this awesome responsibility. And don't be shy about using the tools that you have to make a difference. It's one thing Stephen Harper told me the very first thing I won by 500 votes. He said, don't be the guy that's worried about winning only by 500. Go accomplish something. And if they throw you out, they throw you out. But at least you'll know you've accomplished something. I've never forgotten that advice.
Well, journalists are always very critical of politicians. I know I often write some very tough things sometimes, but I have a secret admiration for anybody who can take that risk of losing, because you're not always a winner in politics. And by the way, you don't have to apologize for adding that anecdote. I always deliberately save that question about getting into politics for last, because it always allows me to duck the staffers who say time's up. So we were in overtime there, and I want to thank the minister for his time. We're out of time for questions. And Education Minister Paul Calandra, thank you for coming to the TMU Democracy Forum. Thanks also to my colleague Kristin Rushowy for helping ask the really good questions today. Thanks to all of you in the audience for listening and for adding your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to more of them. And a special shout out to everyone, the entire team at the Dais, for supporting the Democracy Forum. Thank you, everyone. Merci, Megwetch. Safe travels, everyone. Bye for now.
Thanks again.